9 experienced hikers set out on a ski trek across the northern Urals of the Soviet Union and never came back. When search crews reached their camp, everything was still there. Boots, coats, food, cameras, everything except the hikers. After weeks of searching, the bodies were found in horrifying condition. Hands burned down to the bone, internal injuries similar to a high-speed car crash, but not a single bruise on the skin. Missing eyes and tongues. The Soviet government closed the case 4 months later, classified the files, and told everyone to stop asking questions, but nobody ever did. January 1959. 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set a goal to reach a remote peak called Mount Otorten, 300 kilometers through some of the most isolated terrain in Russia. Achieving that would earn them a Grade 3 certification, the highest hiking classification at that time. On January 28th, 21-year-old Yuri Yudin said goodbye and left the crew because of joint pain. He turned around and headed home, and he was the only one who ever made it back. The 9 who continued were led by Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, engineering student. He and the other 8 hikers held Grade 2 certifications. Semyon, at 37, was the oldest, a World War II veteran who had joined the expedition at the last minute, added by the Institute under circumstances that were never clearly explained. The rest were in their early 20s, fit, trained, and prepared for whatever the Urals could throw at them. Or so everyone assumed. For the first week, everything went according to plan. Diaries recovered later tracked their progress day by day. Notes about the terrain, the cold, small jokes between friends. On January 30th, they celebrated Alexander Kolovatov's birthday with a tangerine he shared with the group. 2 days before all of them would be dead. By February 1st, weather conditions had deteriorated, dropping visibility and rising winds. The group had drifted west off their intended route and ended up on the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Dead Mountain. Dyatlov made a decision to camp on the slope rather than retreat downhill to the tree line. They pitched their tent, cut a platform into the snowbank to level it against the incline, had dinner, and wrote their last journal entries. Sometime that night, something happened. The tent was cut open from the inside, not unzipped, but cut with a knife in multiple places, in a way that forensic analysis later confirmed was driven by urgency. Whoever was cutting wasn't careful. They were getting out as fast as they could. All 9 left. No boots. Most had no coats. Some were in socks. One was in his underwear. The temperature outside was -30 Celsius. They walked in a single file line, calmly, downhill towards the tree line. The footprints showed no panic, no running, just 9 people walking, one after another, away from the only shelter they had, into the freezing dark. Before leaving, Dyatlov had told Yudin to expect a telegram no later than February 12th. February 12th came and went, then a week more. When the family started demanding answers, the Ural Polytechnic Institute organized a search. Volunteer students went first on February 20th, then the army, then police helicopters. 6 days later, on February 26th, they found the tent. Footprints led from the tent down toward the tree line. At 1.5 kilometers out, under a large cedar tree, searchers found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko, both in underwear, both barefoot. A small fire had burned nearby. The lower branches of the cedar, up to 5 meters high, had been stripped off completely. Forensic testing of the bark found skin embedded in the wood. They had climbed that tree, breaking branches with their bare hands in minus 30-degree cold until they physically could not hold on anymore. Georgi had a piece of his own flesh between his teeth, bitten from his right hand, apparently to stay conscious. Yuri had a gray, foamy discharge from his mouth, which investigators noted was consistent with severe blunt force to the chest cavity. The official cause of death for both was hypothermia. 3 more bodies were found on the slope between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov was face up in the snow, both fists clenched, head pointed toward the tent. Zinaida was further up the slope, better dressed than the others, a long bruise across her side that investigators noted was consistent with a blow from a baton. Rustem Slobodin was found on March 5th, face down, with a fracture running across his skull. Doctors concluded he had been alive and conscious for up to an hour after the injury before hypothermia finished it. All 3 appeared to have been crawling back toward the tent when they died. The last 4 weren't found until May 4th when the snow began to melt. They were in a ravine, 75 meters past a cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of snow. They had made a makeshift shelter, branches laid out, a crude den dug into the snowpack, and they were better dressed than the others. They had cut clothing off the bodies of the first 2 who died at the cedar tree and divided it between them. What was done to their bodies is a different matter entirely. Kolevatov had a deformed neck and an open wound behind his right ear. Nikolai had a massive skull fracture, a deep multi-splintered depression on the left side of his head. The medical examiner specifically excluded a simple fall as the cause. In her words, this kind of fracture could only have resulted from Nikolai being thrown through the air and hitting his head against a hard surface on the way down. Of all 9 bodies, Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotarov told the most disturbing story. Both had bilateral chest fractures, multiple ribs broken on both sides simultaneously, with no bruising above the skin, no contusion, no torn tissue. The force had moved through them without marking the surface. The forensic specialist compared the energy required to the impact of a fatal car crash. But the most disturbing finding wasn't the fractures. Both were missing their eyes. Ludmila was also missing her tongue. The medical examiner could not determine whether the tongue and eyes were removed before or after death. She noted only that they were gone and offered no further explanation. What the searchers found on Semyon's body made him the most scrutinized person in the entire case. A small notepad was in his hand, which was never logged into evidence, and the camera was found on his body, unregistered, not listed with the group's equipment. The film inside was developed. Every frame came back, too damaged to read. The official cause of death for most of them was hypothermia. 2 pieces of clothing that belonged to Georgi were found on Ludmila and Kolevatov. When tested, both came back radioactive, far above normal levels. On May 28th, the Soviet investigation was formally closed. The lead prosecutor's conclusion stated that the hikers had died as a result of an unknown compelling force which the hikers were unable to overcome. Decades later, researchers are still debating what that force truly was. 2 theories have held up under serious scrutiny. Both explain something, neither explains everything. The first one is the slab avalanche theory. In 2021, Swiss researchers Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin published a study with a straightforward argument. The group accidentally triggered an avalanche on themselves. Here's how. When they cut into the snowbank to level their tent, they removed a layer of snow that was holding everything above it in place. During the night, strong winds poured additional snow onto that weakened section. At some point, the whole thing gave way. A compressed block of snow, estimated over 1,000 pounds, came directly onto the tent and the people sleeping inside it. That's why the chest fractures showed no bruising. It wasn't a punch or a weapon. It was dense, evenly distributed weight pressing down at once, like being slowly crushed rather than struck. This is widely regarded as the most scientifically plausible explanation for the incident to date. However, it doesn't explain the missing eyes and tongue, why the footprints showed 9 people walking calmly downhill, not running, and why search teams found no avalanche debris at the site 3 weeks later, though the researchers argue that small avalanches in that region can disappear completely within hours in heavy wind. The second one is the Soviet military testing theory. In 1959, the Ural region was one of the most militarily active areas in the Soviet Union. Classified weapons programs were running. R-7 ballistic missiles were being launched from Baikonur, hundreds of kilometers away. Multiple witnesses in the area reported seeing glowing spheres moving across the sky on the exact night the group disappeared. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, admitted in a 1990 interview, 30 years after the fact, that he had personally seen burn marks on pine trees near the site. He also said that every mention of fireballs and unidentified objects in the sky had been deliberately removed from the official case files on direct orders from senior Communist Party officials. Some researchers believe a weapons test went wrong that night. A shockwave from a distant explosion can travel through a human body and shatter bones internally without leaving any mark on the skin, the same pattern found on 4 of the hikers. But the military testing theory leaves its own gaps. If a weapons test caused the injuries, why did only 4 of the 9 show internal fractures and the other 5 didn't? A shockwave doesn't pick and choose. It hits everything in its path equally. And if the group fled because of something they saw or heard in the sky, why did they leave calmly in a single file line instead of running in different directions the way people do when they panic? Then there's the eyes and the tongue. No explosion, no shockwave, no weapons test has ever been documented to selectively remove the eyes from 2 people and the tongue from 1, while leaving everything else around them intact. I've spent a long time going through every theory, every document, every detail of this case, and my honest conclusion is this: what has been solved is a fraction of what is still buried. Somewhere between the sealed files and the missing pages, the real answer still sits untouched. Yuri Yudin, the one who went home early, lived until 2013. He was 75 years old when he died. Yuri never accepted the avalanche theory. He went back to the past once, years later, to leave flowers at the site, and spent his whole life trying to understand what happened to his friends, but he never did. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the few cases in modern history where the official investigation's own conclusion is the most honest thing ever written about it. An unknown compelling force. Not a finding, just an admission.